In fact, it runs contrary to a lot of the thinking both candidates have, because both of them buy into a certain degree of socialism and the idea that government is to supply the needs for people. But one candidate, Senator McCain, is not nearly as extreme as the other. Senator Obama borders on pure Marxism, and his statement, "Share the Wealth," which he's very proud of, shows that those who don't have, that haven't worked, that haven't accumulated, need to be provided for on the basis of taking from those who have worked, who have risked, who have spent 20, 30, 40 years building a business, developing income, risking, sometimes losing their fortunes 2 or 3 times. And now when they finally get there, to have the government come around and to take it from them. And if you're not aware of this, just a little preview of coming attractions, if we get a Democrat, if we get the Trinity from hell, a Democrat-controlled Senate, Congress, Senate House, and White House, because there's already been hearings in the House of a proposal, because they're afraid that if you risk your money, and people have risked their money in their 401ks, that the government just can't let people risk anymore. They have to protect us from our own bad decisions. And so what they are investigating is coming in and having a new program where they're going to basically confiscate the money in everybody's 401ks and put it into the Social Security plan, and then everybody gets to designate approximately 6%, I think, of their income to go into a, quote, retirement plan that is government-run and government-controlled. And so, and I love the, one member of the church sent me a great little illustration the other day that about trusting the government to handle all of our money and to control all these things. Back in 1990, the federal government took over the Mustang Ranch House of Ill Repute in Nevada. And after a few years, they had to close it. And we're going to trust our money and our income and stability to this bunch of political nitwits who can't even make money running a cat house and selling booze in Nevada. But the American people are willing to trust anybody other than have to work, it seems. And when we have 44% of the population on the dole not paying taxes, not contributing to the support of the government, then they're not putting anything at risk. And so it's interesting that the same percentage of people in this country that are not paying taxes is the same percentage of people who responded affirmatively in a poll that they did not think that socialism was all that bad. So we looked at the first divine institution. The second divine institution was marriage. Again, the founding fathers understood the principle of marriage being between one man and one woman, and that this was a bedrock institution that could not be changed. James Wilson, who was a signer of the Declaration and one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court, said, "The most important consequence of marriage is that the husband and the wife become, in law, only one person. Upon this principle of union, almost all the other legal consequences of marriage depend." And so what we have today, though, is that this desire to change the very nature of what marriage is. And an editorial in the Investor's Business Daily stated the consequences of this. "The slippery slope has been greased. If 2 men can marry, why not more than 2? Are laws against polygamy also a violation of our constitutional rights? Was the Texas cult legal?" That's a reference to the fundamentalist Mormon sect that they had the problem with last spring. "There you had a lot of people in a committed relationship raising a lot of children. Heterosexual marriage is not some right-wing plot to deny homosexuals their rights. It's an institution sanctioned, not invented by, but sanctioned. That means recognized and affirmed. An institution sanctioned by all successful nations and cultures because of a compelling interest in a stable, growing society, with heterosexual marriage providing a sturdy framework for both procreation and the orderly upbringing of children. That gets into this third divine institution of family, that the role of family is training children, teaching children. It's a responsibility of family to teach children, not the public government-run, government-financed school, not the church school, not even Sunday school to teach your kids doctrine. It's the responsibility of parents to teach these things to the children and to train them. They're the ones who are going to be held accountable. When you're before the judgment seat of Christ, the issue in terms of your parental responsibilities is not going to be what kind of school did you send your kids to? It's going to be, what did you do to train your kids to walk in the way of the Lord? So this article goes on to say, opponents of the decision will try to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot in November. It's a reference to that decision made by the Supreme Court in California, State Supreme Court. That may be the only way to ensure that activist judges don't further unravel the fabric of society and that government of the people has not become government by just for people, judicial tyranny. And that, by the way, is exactly what Thomas Jefferson recognized, is that when you have people who have worked hard and they have accumulated possessions and accumulated wealth, and then the government comes in and redistributes that to anyone, that is tyranny. That is, to put it in other terms, that's criminality. It's just thievery. It's one thing to have a right to tax in order to supply the needs of the government, highway construction, support for the military, support for government officials and the operation of the government. But to have as a government agenda an economic policy of redistributing money to take from those who have to give to those who have not is nothing more than tyranny and robbery. Now, we looked at the end last time. I wanted to lay down the biblical foundation for government, and that was in Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 and 6. And at the very core is the idea of the judiciary and the delegation of the responsibility to judge and to carry out penalties, criminal penalties, to the degree of taking a life in a capital crime such as murder. And this is laid down in Genesis 9, verses 5 and 6, where God said, "Surely I will require your lifeblood. From every beast I will require it. From every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed." Now, to do that, that entails thinking through the entire judicial process. How are you going to determine who's guilty? How are you going to determine whether it was justified killing or whether it was premeditated homicide? That's what the commandment means in the Ten Commandments. It doesn't mean thou shalt not kill. The Hebrew word is a word that means murder. So that entails development of the whole judicial process. Now, it wasn't long after that, a couple of hundred years after the flood, that you have the first use of the word kingdom in the Bible. And Nimrod, who was a descendant through Ham, decides to establish his own kingdom over against God. It is religiously oriented. And so this is the beginning of what we see in the Bible as the kingdom of man, man's attempt to establish peace, prosperity, happiness, economic stability, share the wealth from from these early days over against obedience to God. God's mandate coming off the ark was to do what? To scatter, to multiply, fill the earth, and man failed to do that. So the kingdom of Babel set up this tower in Shinar, and it had a specific agenda against God. It had a religious orientation. It was a response and a reaction to God because of the judgment at the flood, and that they were going to build this tower high enough to reach heaven. The idea is that somehow we will protect ourselves from this mean, nasty God who's going to interfere with human history and kill everybody who resists him. And so this is a very famous painting of the Tower of Babel. And it was internationalism. It was all of mankind coming together against God. And so God judged them by confusing the languages, because up until that point, everybody spoke the same language, so everybody could communicate, and the whole human race could gang up against God.